Hi, everybody. Shalom. I just wanted to do like a really quick recap. We had Now You See TV, who did a video about the Essenes, February 25th last month. They're called The Mysterious Essenes with Gary Wayne and David Carrico on Now You See TV. And they basically lied about what the Essenes believed. And so there's a lot of falsehoods being spread about them. Then Joshua asked for a discussion on whether or not it's a sin to eat meat. And John Pounders decided to host a debate instead. That debate occurred 3 days ago. And leading up to the debate, John ended up making a few videos saying things that painted Joshua in a bad light. Then he lied in the debate about what Joshua said and apparently was deleting comments from the video that had proof about that what was being said about these teams was wrong. So we're just going to try to clear up the misconceptions that are going around and discuss what the Essenes were actually really like based on the actual historical records and things like that. Brad was fueled by the debate. He uploaded a couple of videos on the historical references to the Essenes. I'll leave the link below in the description box. And he said he didn't know where people were getting this idea that the Essenes were Catholic, Freemason, Rosicrucians. So Kris knows why, so we're going to let Kris discuss that just a little bit real quick.
Hey everyone. So I bought Gary Wayne's book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, last year, and I read about maybe a third of the way through it before Father told me to stop, and I didn't know why until this week when that debate went on. And, you know, people were telling me that the Essenes were Luciferians and Freemasons and stuff, but I hadn't gotten to that chapter in the book yet about the Essenes, so I went and looked at all the references that Gary used in his book, and I just kind of wanted to go through a few of them, list off a few of them, because most of them are like really, really new. I have not read any of these books, but we'll go through later in the live chat. Brad will bring up a lot of actual historical references on the Essenes, but I'm just going to list off some of the books that were used to defame the Essenes. So book is called The Second Messiah by Knight and Lomas from 1997, Uriel's Machine by Knight and Lomas from 1999, Unger's Dictionary from 1988, Realm by Gardner from 2000, Book of Haram by Knight and Lomas again from 2003, Lost Secrets by Gardner, 2003, Freemasonry and the Essenes by Mackey from 2010, David and Solomon by Silverman and Finkelstein from 2007, Treasure at Geysers from Mark Hale from 2003, The Da Vinci Code by Brown from 2009, Knights Templar by Sora, 1999, The Philosopher's Stone by Marshall, 2001, and The Element Encyclopedia by Greer, 2006. He did quote the historian Josephus, but I went through and read one of his references where he said, because everyone kept telling me that he said the Essenes were worshiping angels and stuff, so I went back. Let me read the part. I don't know how he got they were worshiping angels from this. Okay, so the white-garbed Essenes were members of a cult that studied and preserved knowledge from the ancients, according to Josephus. Essenes considered white garments proper attire for all occasions. They were a secret society preserving their secrets and the names of their guiding angels even unto death. And I think it's weird that he said that they were a cult that wore white robes when, you know, in Revelation it says that the saints wear white robes. But anyway, if it's okay, real quick, I'm going to read from Josephus. This is where he apparently is quoting from. So this is Josephus of the War, Book 2, Chapter 8, Verse 7. But now, if any one hath a mind to come over to their sect, he is not immediately admitted, but he is prescribed the same method of living which they use for a year, while he continues excluded. And they give him also a small hatchet and the aforementioned girdle, the white garment. And when he hath given evidence during that time that he can observe their countenance, he approaches nearer to their way of living, and is made a partaker of the waters of purification. Yet is he not even now admitted to live with them. For after this demonstration of his fortitude, his temper is tried 2 more years. And if he appear to be worthy, they then admit him into their society. And before he is allowed to touch their common food, he is obliged to take tremendous oaths, that, in the first place, he will exercise piety towards God, and then that he will observe justice toward men, and that he will do no harm to anyone, either of his own accord or by the command of others, that he will always hate the wicked and be assistant to the righteous, that he will ever show fidelity to all men, and especially to those in authority, because no one obtains the government without God's assistance, and that if he be in authority, he will at no time whatever abuse his authority, nor endeavor to outshine his subjects, either in his garments or any other finery, that he will be perpetually a lover of truth, and propose to himself to reprove those that tell lies, that he will keep his hands clear from theft, and his soul from unlawful gains, and that he will neither conceal anything from those of his own sect, nor discover any of their doctrines to others, no, not though anyone should compel him so to do at the hazard of his life. Moreover, he swears to communicate their doctrines to no one any otherwise than as he received them himself, that he will abstain from robbery, and will equally preserve the books belonging to their sect, and the names of the angels or messengers. These are the oaths by which they secure their proselytes to themselves. So nowhere does it say that they worship angels, only that they know the angels' names. So back to you, Barb.
Oh, that's really very interesting. And I just want everybody to be able to speak up if anybody has anything else to say on that. But yeah, it's really sad to see people reading this book from Gary and just getting the wrong information about it, you know. They should be going and researching it themselves with Josephus. He's doing a very big disservice to people, I think, by passing this off. I mean, I don't know. Is he doing it on purpose? I don't know, but it's really sad to see that. Anybody else?
Yeah, just to kind of lend credibility to Christine's work here. When you research something, we should be researching things in the ancient past, not things within the last 10, 15 years. Those works are no good. Why? We're talking about an ancient people. How can you make reference to things that are modern day for something that is ancient? It doesn't, I mean, when I do research on historical history, I've got it way back in the archives. But this gentleman, I can't remember his name now, is using references to things that are within the last 15 years. That to me doesn't seem credible whatsoever.
Well, another thing I think it's worth throwing out there, if you actually go back to the Dead Sea Scrolls and read what they have to say, they weren't worshiping the angels. The sons of Zadok viewed the heavenly temple or the earthly temple as a shadow of the heavenly temple. And so the same way that there would be priests on the earthly temple worshiping the Almighty, that there were angels in heaven that were also worshiping at the same time. And that was one of the reasons that they were so stringent about keeping the proper calendar, was because they saw their mission as they had to be there to supplement the praise and worship of the angels. So if they were worshiping at the wrong time, then it would throw off this synchronicity between the earth and the heavens. So they were not, and you can see that in the Song of the Sabbath Sacrifice, where the teacher of righteousness is speaking about praising with the angels, not praising the angels themselves.
Thank you for clearing that up. I haven't ever read the Dead Sea Scrolls personally.
Well, there was a book written by Robert Eisenman, or actually several books, but he connects the teacher of righteousness in the Dead Sea Scrolls with James, the brother of Yeshua. Yeshua himself would have been the Dead Sea Scrolls. They speak about the Messiah. They mention a righteous priest who also goes by this cognomen, the prophet, or the prophet of truth, the same as you see in the writings of the Ebionites. So, and there's a number of biographical, historical references in the Habakkuk Pesher and in the Damascus document that would connect this teacher of righteousness to James, the brother of Yeshua. And in fact, some of these documents appear to be written right after the death of James. They speak about a man known as the spouter of lies that has usurped the message of the righteous priest. And so there's a number of different connections that we can make between first century Judea and the Nazarenes and the Ebionites in conjunction with the Essenes. And I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of these more scholarly people that study the Dead Sea Scrolls, they try to push them back into the first century BC because they want to muddy that connection between the family of Yeshua and the people that we see spoken about in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Another reference for that would also be in the Recognitions of Clement. It talks about James, and Clement himself was a direct student to James the Just, or to the brother of Yeshua. And so a lot of those writings have been historically proven to support both the Dead Sea Scrolls and the fact that James was in fact, vegan himself. So, and followed at least the beliefs of the Essenes to some degree, whether it be Nazarene. A lot of those, like I said, I think a lot of those are the Essenes, Nazarenes, and the Ebionites, I think are pretty much the same people.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Could I read a few historical references to the disciples being vegetarians?
Yeah.
All right.
Please.
Okay, so this is from early church father Hieronymus. The consumption of animal flesh was unknown up until the Great Flood. But since the Great Flood, we have had animal flesh stuffed into our mouths. Jesus the Christ, who appeared when the time was fulfilled, again joined the end to the beginning, so that we are no longer allowed to eat animal flesh. There is... Okay, here we go. The Jewish Christians called themselves the Ebionites. Ebionite is a word derived from the Hebrew meaning a poor. And we remember in the scriptures when Christ said to be like the poor, the poor and the meek will inherit the earth. They trace their vow of poverty back to the first Christian community described in the New Testament Acts of the Apostles, and were a spiritual or intentional community that shared all of their possessions in common. So they were like a communal living, like farmers and healers. This is from the Recognitions of Clement and the Homilies. Epiphanius quotes their gospel, the Ebionite or Hebrew gospel, as ascribing these words to Jesus. I have come to destroy the sacrifices, that's Panarion 30, and as ascribing to Jesus rejection of the Passover meat. And these are analogous to numerous passages found in the Recognitions and Homilies. This is from Panarion 30. The Ebionite or Hebrew gospel quotes Jesus as saying, I have come to abolish the sacrifices, and if you cease not from sacrificing, my wrath will not cease from you. This is from the Clementine Homilies. St. Peter states the unnatural eating of flesh meats is polluting with its sacrifices and its impure feasts. Peter said, I live on olives and bread, to which I rarely only add vegetables. That's from the Clementine Homilies. John never ate meat. That was from church historian Hegesip, according to Eusebius from History of the Church. James, the brother of the Lord, lived on seeds and plants and touched neither meat nor wine. That's epistule ad postum. James, the brother of the Lord, was holy from his mother's womb, and he drank no wine, nor strong drink, nor did he eat flesh. Josephus quoted in the church history of Eusebius, and it just keeps going on and on. So,
Christine, can I, real quick, I need to make a correction because I spoke apparently out of turn.
okay.
Clement was a student of Peter, not James. I
Oh,
spoke,
yeah.
sorry.
But they were all connected
Yeah.
to each other.
Right.
They were all friends.
One of the things that I was looking at yesterday is this connection to the Essenes. One of the doctrines that they followed was that they did not eat meat either. You know, they kept a vegetarian diet in the same way that the Nazarenes did. And if we just look at some of the things that are said about the Essenes, you quoted from Josephus. If we back up a couple of paragraphs from where you started, when Josephus first introduces the Essenes, he said, "These men are despisers of riches, and so very communicative as raises our admiration. Nor is there any one to be found among them who hath more than another, for it is the law among them that those who come to them must let what they have be held in common with the other, insomuch that among them there is no appearance of poverty or excess of riches, but everyone's possessions are intermingled with everyone else's." Sounds very similar to what we see in Acts chapter 4, where it says, "With great power the emissaries gave witness to the resurrection and the Master Yeshua, and great favor was upon them all, for there was not anyone needy among them," almost the exact words Josephus used, "for all who were possessors of lands or houses sold them and brought the prices of what was sold and laid them at the feet of the emissaries. So they distributed to each one as had need." And of course, we see from Yeshua, no one's able to serve two masters, for either he'll hate the one and love the other, or cleave to the one and despise the other. You're not able to serve Elohim and Mammon. Josephus goes on to say that they have no one in a certain city, but many of them dwell in every city. And if any other sect come from other places, what they have lies open for them, just as if they were their own. And they go into such as they never knew before, as if they had been ever so long acquainted with them, for which reason they carry nothing at all with them when they travel into remote parts, though still they take their weapons with them for fear of thieves. Accordingly, there is in every city where they live one appointed particularly to take care of strangers and to provide garments and other necessities for them, but the habit and management of their bodies is such as children use who are in fear of their masters. Lines up perfectly with what Yeshua said to his 12 disciples, where he sent them out and said, "Don't go into the way of the Gentiles, and do not enter a city of the Samaritans, but go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, proclaim, saying, the reign of heavens has drawn near. Heal the sick, cleanse the leper, raise the dead, cast out demons. You have received without paying, give without being paid. Do not acquire gold or silver or copper for your money belts, or a bag for the journey, or 2 undergarments, or sandals or staffs, for the work is worthy of his hire. And to whatever city or village you enter, ask who is worthy in it, and stay there until you leave. And as you enter into a house, greet it. And if the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And whoever does not receive you, nor hear your words, when you leave the house, shake off the dust from your feet." So Yeshua specifically tells them not to carry anything for their journey and not to go into the cities. Later on, Josephus says that the Essenes never dwelt in the cities. They would just stay in the smaller towns, which is exactly where Yeshua is telling them to go. And when an Essene comes from another town into your town, even if you don't know them, you essentially would open your doors to them just like they were your family. And it appears, based upon what Yeshua is saying, almost the exact same words, the same phrases that Josephus uses. I think he was actually using this network of Essene villages in order for his apostles to be able to go out and spread his message. So again, it doesn't sound very much to me like Masonic Rosicrucian types.
No.
They were poor, you know. I know that's where the Ebionites is the poor, and we were told to not worry about what we're going to wear and what we're going to eat and what we're going to drink and all that stuff. And just our Father takes care of the birds. He's going to take care of us too. So why are you worried about, you know, how you're going to make this money for this or whatever, you know? But they just went out with very little, and they were fine. That's a lot of faith, I think, and it's really sad to see people like putting them down when they were actually following our Father and going out and doing what they were supposed to be doing, actually leaving, forsaking everything else, and, you know, giving it to the poor, you know.
I think it's odd. You know, Josephus was born about the time that Yeshua was killed, and so these Essenes that he's writing about, this is after the time of Yeshua. So if the Essenes were the early, you know, Jewish Christian groups, you would expect that they would be keeping the teachings that Yeshua has given them. You know, later on he says they are eminent for fidelity and are the ministers of peace. Whatsoever they say is also firmer than an oath, but swearing is avoided by them, and they esteem it worse than perjury. For they say that he who cannot be believed without swearing by Elohim is already condemned. Now, this is following Yeshua's teachings in Matthew 5:33. Again, you heard it said of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to Yahuwah. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heavens, because it is Elohim's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. But swear by your head, because you're not able to make one hair white or black, but let your word yea be yea, and your no be no. And what goes beyond that is of the wicked one. Again, I mean, it's just perfect harmony with what Yeshua taught.
You reminded me, you did a video just last night, and you were talking about how the only group, they were saying that there's no other group out there that does this. And I thought that was really interesting, because if the historian back then was saying that there's no other group that does this except this group, that goes along. If the Bible is true, then that has to be the followers, right?
Right.
So, I mean, if the Bible is true, then at that time, there was no other group out there that was actually acting in this manner, except this group of the Essenes.
Well, there's a gentleman named Robert Feather that's written a couple of books on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he's not part of the scholarly circles. He's, I think, involved in like metallurgy or something. But he's made this connection with Yeshua and the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I just completely forgot my train of thought. I had something that reinforced what you just said, and I can't remember what it was now.
You said they were the only group that were doing the things that Yeshua was teaching, according to history. Right.
Oh, he while he was exploring Qumran, they actually discovered, you know, there seems to be this theory that there's this connection between John the Baptist and the Qumran Essenes. Well, they actually found a body. Now, you know, there's a graveyard there, and most of the bodies are not. They were buried, you know, with no clothing, all facing the same direction, no caskets or anything like that, except for one body. There was one body there that was actually in a wooden box. And Mr. Feather said, well, this seemed to indicate that this person had died somewhere else and was brought to Qumran. And so when they excavated this body that they exhumed, it didn't have a head. And so this is, which itself would relate back to the story of John the Baptist, that he was beheaded while in prison, and that his apostles took his body, but they didn't have his head because his head had been taken to Herod. Right. And so when they studied the bones of this person, it was a 30-year-old male, and it perfectly fit the description of John the Baptist.
Wow.
I know that I put your video up in a group, and a woman basically said that, oh, it already proves that these Essenes weren't the real followers because of the way that they treated women. Supposedly she thought that they didn't allow women into the community, and I don't remember you saying that in your video, Brad. you remember saying anything like that, where they didn't allow the women into the community?
Well, there was more than one group of Essenes. The sect at Qumran did not, but there's also a kind of a newer theory by the people that are studying the Dead Sea Scrolls that the community at Qumran was not a normal community. It was more like a retirement type of community. And so the men that were retiring there were, widowers, and they weren't allowed to take another wife. Now, Josephus and I think Philo both mentioned that there were different sects.
I actually have it right here. After you're done, I can read it.
Okay. And Hegesippus himself even says that there were 4 sects of the Essenes, and one of them rejected marriage, but the others were the exact opposite. They believed that marriage was a commandment, and that if they didn't get married, they were forsaking the commandment of Elohim to be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah, I read somewhere that Qumran, like you said, was kind of like a monastery in a way, like more like based on just devoting your whole entire life to the Father and not having a family. But so this is from Josephus, Book 2 of the War, again, chapter 8, verse 13. Moreover, there is another order of the Essenes who agree with the rest as to their way of living and customs and laws, but differ from them in the point of marriage, as thinking that by not marrying they cut off the principal part of human life, which is the prospect of succession. Nay, rather, that if all men should be of the same opinion, the whole race of mankind would fail. However, they try their spouses for 3 years, and if they find that they have their natural purgations thrice, I have no idea what that means, as trials that they are likely to be fruitful, then they actually marry them.
Yes, Brad just talked about that this morning. You can get into it, Brad.
What was that?
Oh, the purgations, the 3-year trial.
Yeah, and I guess this may sound kind of off the wall, and I don't know if this is what that means, but the one thing I can think about is it seems like that they only had 1 menstruation a year. I mean, I can't think of anything else that would be referring to, which seems to be a trait of women who go into eating vegan, is that they don't have a monthly cycle.
Yes, I've read that recently.
And so I don't know, like I said, I don't know if that's what that means, but I can't understand what else it could possibly refer to.
And they aren't just like actually like having intercourse with these people, right? They weren't quite married. They were just sort of betrothed.
Right. And it sounds similar to what we see with Joseph and Mary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the woman said she was really against that 3-year trial marriage. And I was saying, but it doesn't say marriage, they were just together for 3 years. So, and yeah, I've heard that story with Joseph and Mary, that they were together and it was like they're married, but they weren't actually joining together, knowing each other yet. So,
because I think in the Hebrew tradition, like sex, the act of sex is like marriage, right? At least that's what I've come to understand. Like in the Old Testament, when it said like, this man would go into him and she became his wife.
Abraham went into Sarah's tent and they became married, or they became man and wife. But there was no the whole idea of marriage ceremony, rings, all that stuff is all pagan.
Right.
So you simply betrothed yourself to something, from my understanding. If I'm wrong, please feel free to interject. But my understanding is that when you chose a wife, you did so, and then you lived with that person the rest of your life. And it wasn't a huge, it wasn't a state issue. It was a more of a your spouse before the father issue. When in the Essene Gospel of Peace, when Gabriel goes to Mary, they were already supposedly betrothed and married. Because it really isn't completely clear, but I believe you would consider them married. Because Gabriel says, take your wife, and your firstborn will be the Mashiach.
Right, because I mean, even in the canon scriptures, it says that Joseph was going to divorce her, but they hadn't even consummated their marriage yet. So, but being betrothed or promised is also considered marriage to the Jews.
Right. See, well, that's another issue. How can you divorce someone if you're not married?
Yeah.
So do you guys remember from the Nazarene Acts of the Apostles? There was this, what we refer to as the Ascents of James, but it's where the Nazarenes go into the temple and they're debating with the high priest and the other ministering priests about Yeshua, and Kepha says that there is no more sacrifices, that Yeshua commanded them to stop sacrificing, and that from this point forward they should be immersing themselves in water for purification instead of making sacrifices.
Mm-hmm.
As I was reading yesterday, I got up to now the part of Josephus we'd read before that was from the War of the Jews. In his second work, the Antiquities, he goes into a little bit more detail about the Essenes. And so he says that the doctrine of the Essenes is this, that all things are best described to Elohim. They teach the immortality of the soul and esteem the rewards of righteousness are to be earnestly striven for. And when they send what they have dedicated to Elohim into the temple, they do not offer sacrifices, because they have a more pure lustrations of their own, on which account they are excluded from the common court of the temple, but offer their sacrifices themselves. Now, I didn't know what lustration was, so I had to look it up. But a lustration is a ceremonial washing, or what we would think of, from the Christian side of it, a baptism. And in the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves, they say that the temple is defiled by blood, and that we are not to be offering sacrifices of animals any longer, but that the sacrifices would be actually the prayers from the saints. And their council of elders was actually, and see if this sounds familiar, a council of 12 priests, or I'm sorry, three priests and then 12 elders, which is the same thing we see with Yeshua and his apostles. He had the 12 apostles, and then he had 3 of them that were kind of like a higher level, the pillars of the apostles.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's the same. It's almost the exact same thing we see with the early Nazarenes.
Right, and in the Clementine writings, the main character is pretty much Kepha or Peter. And even in our canon, in 1 Peter 2:5, it says, "You also are living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ."
There's also that, and this is one of the verses I've always had the issue with, is when they take Paul supposedly, and they claim that he took a Nazarite vow, but part of the Nazarite vow was sacrificing animals. Well, that is in direct contradiction to what we know the Nazarenes and the Essenes and Ebionites even did.
And then in the Old Testament, didn't it say that they couldn't touch any dead thing, but then they had to sacrifice? Yeah. That makes no sense.
Well, no, and I the other night I addressed that. I said, hey, doesn't the Torah say X, Y? Doesn't the Torah say you can't even touch the dead animal? And the opposing person said, no, it doesn't say that. Well, how can you say that when it does say that? That is one of the commands in the so-called Torah, is you don't touch the dead animal. Well, then you can't eat one either.
I thought that was a good point. If you can't touch a dead animal, why are you going to be able to put it into your mouth and eat it?
Right.
This is kind of off topic, but it's just been one of my most favorite points, and it's so simple when you really think about it. But Yeshua called his true followers sheep, and the enemy is wolves. And what do we see? What's the difference between a sheep and a wolf? You know, a sheep is an herbivore, and it's peaceful, and it's loving towards mankind and loving towards each other. But a wolf is a carnivore and tears flesh and eats blood. And it's just, you know, when we grew up in Christianity, like, I feel like it was teaching us all of these wolf qualities, you know, sacrifice and spill all this blood. And it's just become a blood cult, in my opinion, and far away from what the early followers were like, you know, peaceful and loving towards all things, you know, like all life was sacred.
Yeah, I can't, until the Father woke me up, I didn't understand it, but now I can't even wrap my head around how can you, if the Father never, again, it goes down, if the Father never changes, which every religious group basically claims, not every all, but most of them claim that the Father never changes. If he never changes, then how do you go from Genesis 1 to Genesis 6 or 7? Whichever one talks about the whole, that they want to read as, you know, as killing of animals, but that's not what it says.
Well, even if we go by that interpretation, which, like you, I don't agree with it. I don't think that's what the Torah originally said. But even if we take the text that we have for what is translated to say, the only person given permission to eat animals in Genesis 6 is Noah and his family themselves. So, you know, someone could make the argument that it was because the land was destroyed and they had to have a food source between, you know, the time that instruction was given and they were able to actually plant and harvest crops. But nowhere in there does it say that all of mankind has permission to now do a 180 and start eating the flesh of animals.
Well, my understanding of that verse is that what he actually says is creeping things. And creeping things are insects, not animals.
Yeah, I think in the Septuagint it actually says lizards or something like that.
Or like the eggs of lizards or something. I heard once somebody mention the egg or the offspring, but I'm not sure. But going back to Noah, just on a logical explanation, like if the humans had to eat the clean animals in order to stay alive until vegetation was regrown, what about all the other animals? What were they eating? What about, you know, the so-called carnivores? I mean, there had 7 of each clean animal, and there aren't that many clean animals.
Right.
I mean, how is that supposed to feed, you know, every living thing that was on that boat? So it just doesn't make sense on logical.
Right. It would have been a lot simpler if he just carried some more grain on the ark.
Right.
Another thing that was brought up was he told them to take some clean and unclean animals, but when did they even know what's a clean and unclean animal if they weren't eating meat at that time? You know, where did they even get that instruction from about what's clean and what's unclean? But why would it be, you know, this animal is clean if we can't eat animals before the ark is coming? You know, like the whole flood thing.
That is an excellent point.
And the book of Enoch tells us that, you know, it was the fallen angels that taught men how to eat meat and flesh and blood. So I don't know where that commandment came from, to be honest.
The research and study that I've been doing for the last couple of years has really, really reinforced the fact that a lot of the books that were removed for very specific reasons. Enoch gives us a whole ancient history on all of the wickedness and where we were taught to fall, how we were taught to fall, how we were taught to do all these things, from everything from killing animals, makeup, abortion, all that stuff is basically laid at the feet of the fallen angels who taught it to us. You know, Jasher talks about a whole ancient history that that there's a whole gap in Scripture where Jasher is, or it goes into more detail about the city of Babylon. all of them. I mean, basically, if you go through all of them and you read them in context, you know, I'm a big proponent of telling people, look, go and read the books. It's not going to hurt you to read it. It's not going to hurt you to read it. And then go to, you hear me all the time, go to the Father. Yeshua himself said, we need no man teach us. I am living proof of that. He said, sit, I'll show you what's right and what's wrong. I'll show you how to live your life. We've got to, and I think it's even in the Essene Gospel of Peace, it says, look, you can throw away the so-called scriptures are dead. You can go and find truth in nature. Now, am I a proponent of doing that? No, but the point is, if without the leading of the Heavenly Father, what do we have? Man leading us.
Exactly. That was like with Barb and me. We both went vegetarian just because of the conviction of the Spirit, and that was months and months and months before we ever found out about the Essenes or the Ebionites or the Essenes, any of these early groups. But, you know, everything was just confirming what we had already learned from Father and the Spirit. So it's totally true. We need to kind of learn to push back a little bit on believing in books and written word 100% and really get into our discernment and start listening with our spirits.
And then Father will confirm it, you know. He does confirm what he wants us to know.
Yeah, just to add, no, I was just saying, just to add to that, you know, we're all raised the past, you know, now's Passover season, blah, blah, blah. Well, I've heard pastors say, well, it's okay if you want to be vegan, vegetarian, that's fine. Really? Because would it not be a sin then to not do Passover according to religion? How do you reconcile that? If
I
the Father
asked somebody, I know, that's
Go
crazy.
ahead,
They think that he commanded them to do this. And then I asked, well, if he commanded it and you think that not doing that is a sin, then you're saying that all vegetarians and vegans are living in sin for not, you know, partaking. And how can that be true? You know, what if were Adam and Eve living in sin for not eating? I mean, or does he not change? You know, it's just crazy.
Amen.
Well, really, from my own experience and just sharing this message, the reaction you get is usually just this visceral hatred that people come back with. And, you know, if they disagree, like if they disagreed with you, you would think that the reaction would be more like, hey, I just don't feel that way, you know, that sort of thing. But you could be just having a discussion, not even telling anyone that you have to give up meat. You could just be saying, look, you know, this is what the apostles originally believed. In fact, I was giving a presentation before a group of people last year, and I was just going through the different references that we have to the Ebionites and the Nazarenes and the Essenes and all these groups, and that they were all vegetarian. And then the references similar to the ones that Christina was reading, where the apostles did not eat meat. And in the middle of it, this guy's like, wait a minute. Okay, I just need to ask you this question. Are you saying that I can't eat meat? And I said, no, I'm not saying you can't eat meat. I'm telling you what the historical references say. If beyond that, it's up to you to make your own decision, to do your own research, and then you come to your own conclusion. And he goes, so who are you to tell me that I can't eat meat? And I was like, dude, I didn't say you couldn't eat meat. I just said, this is, you know, well, you're just pushing your own theology. Well, no, look, this right here is written by Josephus. You know, this right here is written by Eusebius. I didn't write this. You know, this is not my theology. I'm not James. You know, it's not my theology. And it just turned in like half the group of people just got up and left. Some woman started yelling at me about sacrificing Passover lambs. And it was like, the reaction that you get is so illogical and so, you know, it's like the other night when Joshua, when you were having that discussion, and you would say one thing, and then he would turn around and say the exact opposite. And it's almost like there's, and I hate to just, you know, say like, you know, it's demons or whatever, but I really think that people
don't hate to say that. I
have
to stand up for that is exactly, I believe, what it is.
It is spiritual blindness.
It is just, it happens so often, and it will eventually it'll turn into a situation where they are accusing you of exactly what they're doing. Like they will call you names and then tell you to quit calling them names. And you're like, dude, I haven't called you any names. I haven't said any. And we're all laughing about it because I know we've all experienced it.
Well,
it is a spiritual blindness, I think. You know, a stronghold, a demonic stronghold based on idolatry. I mean, we have with Clementine Homily 8, I talk about in my other videos where it says, you know, if you eat the flesh of animals, you're giving those angels or demons or whatever the right to be your Lord. You know, you're letting them be your Lord rather than Yehoshua being your Lord. You know, and if you stop, then they can't lord that over you anymore. So, you know, Yehoshua came to free us from being that slaves, but people are still wanting to, you know, be a part of that. They don't realize that. Yeah, go on.
You know, it's just, I don't think it's they want to. It's that we have been detached from the idea of understanding spiritual legalism. And I don't mean that in a bad way. What I mean is we give angels, demons, legal right to act on our behalf or not on our behalf based on what we do in this life. If the angels taught us how to slaughter animals, which Enoch clearly says they did, and then the fallen ones, the Nephilim are the demonic spirits, and we're continuing to do that practice, that they are the sons of the fallen angels. Again, I'm not trying to get into all. We've given legal right to the demonic to act against us. This is why I believe Yeshua said, we're snared by the words of our mouth. You know, you have good and evil in the tongue. Don't let the names of the fallen ones be on your lips. Why? Because what we speak is vibration and it is word. It is power. And you're giving right, legal right, to what you speak and what you do.
I agree. I know. I had a deliverance when I got woken up, and you know, I just felt like as soon as you truly repent to our Father, then He will clear your mind of things. And I know that's demonic because I know that I went through, you know, the spiritual blindness at first. I mean, I knew about demons, but I still didn't, you know, realize that I needed that deliverance until Father woke me up. I know that they're real. I know that spiritual blindness is real. And I do believe that's what's happening to people as they give legal right by eating the dead flesh. And that's why the enemy has put it in most of our food, basically, everywhere you go. I mean, not even just food, but even products in the store. Just, it's ridiculous, but that's why.
Has anyone looked up the word glutton? Like the word glutton actually directly relates, one, to the consumption of flesh, but the idea of gluttony actually breaks like 5 commands, because you're taking the life of another to sustain yourself, which is lust, bearing false witness, killing, and there's 2 others I can't think of off the top of my head, but most of them are all interchangeable and related, which is why I believe Yeshua said you can't break one without breaking them all.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we were, in my house, we were going through a period of spiritual attacks there for a couple of years. And I mean, we would even see spirits manifest in our house. And what the connection was, we eventually understood through prayer and just through Yeshua, the Father revealing it to us, that it was coming from part of our extended family. I had a person in our family that was involved in, you know, drug addiction. And so anytime that our children were around them, then that's when this manifestation seemed to come up. And it continued, and we couldn't understand how it was that these spirits were able to come into our house. And when I read that in the Nazarene Acts about eating meat, it was about 3 months after I went vegetarian, and it wasn't until that moment that I realized that at the same time that I stopped eating meat, all of this spiritual manifestations ceased. It ended. So I do think that there's definitely evidence to support that the way that these demonic entities get in is through our own consumption of animal flesh.
It's through floodgates, essentially. I mean, that's what the occults do. You know, they spill blood and then demons appear.
Right.
So,
And Kifa talked about not eating with people that were unclean, how you could get some of that, you know, by just associating with them too. So we're really got to, I think, pay attention to that about who we eat with and things like that. There is science that talks about how you can get like good or bad bacteria based on who you're eating next to. And I think that the demons work in the same way, that there's some sort of, you know, the closeness that you get to somebody, you can sort of end up picking it up by who you associate with in some way. Based on eating, though, I think that it's based on eating, because Yehoshua would talk to people all the time without, you know, ever having any issues associating with people. But eating with them, I think, is something that was special in some way.
Well, if you, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, in the ancient Near East, a meal, and you can see this in the scripture, that sitting down and having a meal was a step involved in cutting a covenant with somebody. In fact, we talked about in one of the Facebook groups the book, The Threshold Covenant. Well, there's another book by the same author, it's the Salt Covenant. And so if you sit down, like even today, if you were to go into the ancient or to the Near East area, and let's say you went into, you know, for some reason you were going into a Muslim's home, and you were going to eat with this Muslim, they would take the salt off the table, and they would make sure they didn't put any salt in the food that you're eating, because if you sit down at the table and two of you consume salt together, there's something about the salt that you are essentially entering into a covenant with that person. And so, you know, someone like a Muslim who's kind of against the faith that we would practice of the belief in Yeshua, they don't want to end up in covenant with us, because then it makes it a greater offense if they were to ever harm us, because they've had salt. We've had this covenant of salt between us. So sitting down to have a meal with somebody who themselves are demon possessed, you're coming into a covenant with that person. And I think that may be the connection that Kifa was trying to avoid.
No, that was exactly what Kifa was trying to avoid. At least that's been my understanding of it. I've argued this point often about, you know, Paul rebuked Peter for backing away, and it wasn't because he was a hypocrite. Paul himself was a hypocrite. Peter was trying to protect himself and those that he was with from getting anything from anybody that might be unclean at the table. It really wasn't, and it's not about magic. It's not about, you know, that kind of stuff. It's really simple spiritual logistics. You know, a lot of stuff that we don't understand because we lack the knowledge now. But they knew it back then, and they understood it. You know, I think I told Barb and Kris this the last discussion we had. When Yeshua got off the boat in Galilee, and the man that had the legion with him came running to him, and he came running to him, and he fell on his face. And Yeshua says, "What is your name?" I've heard pastor after pastor, oh, he's talking to the demon. No, he wasn't. He was asking the man what his name was, and the demon answered him. Then the demon begs to be cast into the pigs. Most pastors can't tell you why. I can tell you why. Because the man that was possessed by the legion of demons was part of a satanic or a cult ritual involving pigs and demonic. It was a orgy, basically, is what it was. But that most of those cult things back then, that's what they were. And so what the demons wanted to do, they wanted to finish their ritual. That's why they asked to be cast into the pigs, because at the end of the ritual, you'd know the ritual was done, because all the demonic spirits in during this gathering would jump into pigs, and the pigs would go running off the cliff. Well, what did we see happen at the gathering of demoniac? All the demons jumped into the pigs, and the pigs did what? They ran into the ocean and drowned themselves. They just finished the ritual. We don't read. No, so that.
Where did you read this?
Well, obviously scripture, but you have to go back and look at the. I'd have to go pull it up for you. It's in. Give me a sec. There's in a book I read about satanic rituals. Ancient satanic rituals, not modern day rituals, but back in the time of Yeshua. There was I forgot the name of the cult. It was they were worshiping, not Isis, Athena. It was a ritual to the goddess Athena, and often her rituals consisted of group orgies and other very gross things. But you can reference it in, you look it up, there's lots of references actually for it.
Interesting. Is Athena another goddess, like equivalent of Semiramis?
Possibly, yeah.
Because, I mean, that would make sense if it was dealing
The goddess
with
of fertility is what she was.
Well, with pig death, too, because her son Tammuz was, like, killed by a boar. So that's why they're, like, obsessed with pigs and swine and stuff. Okay, I'll look that up. Thank you.
Yeah, all of these fertility goddesses are basically the same. You know, Ishtar and Astarte, and they're all just relate back to Semiramis. So even in, I guess you guys have heard of the Dietary, the teaching of the 12.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even in it says there in chapter 6, verse 3, it says, regarding eating, do the best you can. Yet by all means abstain entirely from meat sacrificed to idols, for eating such is worshiping the gods of the dead. And, you know, in modern day, we look at something like that and we think, okay, well, just because we can't eat meat that's sacrificed to an idol, it doesn't mean we can't eat meat at all.
The word there is not meat. The word there is food. That word was transformed into the word meat. But if you look at the original text, it's not meat, it's food. The word is broma.
Right. But even then, like, you can't, there was no separation in the ancient Near East or even in the Greco-Roman world. If you were eating meat, it came from an idol. Right. You know, people, it's not like people do today where they go out and just, slaughter an animal in their farm. You would actually have to go and make an offering to the priest at the local shrine, and you would keep a portion of the meat for yourself. So anything involving the Israelites going to an idol, it involved eating meat in the process of it.
There's also another understanding that when you eat meat, you're also sacrificing it to idolatry, which is your stomach. You are killing another animal to feed your own belly and yourself. That in itself is the exact definition of idolatry.
Right, but even if we went with the understanding, a lot of people say, like, oh, well, that's when it says about that about eating meat, they're just talking about eating, kosher, don't eat pork or whatever. But would you really expect the apostles to say something like, do the best you can, but if you do have to eat pork, go ahead and do it?
No.
I don't think that's something that would not be an area that they would, by any means whatsoever, compromise.
And that's why, where is it written when Paul says that those who don't eat meat are weak in faith? And it's kind of laughable because it's like the total opposite, actually. You have to have a lot of discipline and faith to get away from the meat eating, because it is addicting, like you guys were talking about in the beginning.
Well, not only that, but Paul that directly contradicts the whole story of Daniel, like, and actually multiple stories in Scripture. But I love the fact that they try to use that as their argument.
Right, but of course, you know who the target of his attack was. It was James and the apostles themselves.
Right.
That's who he was saying they were weak in faith.
Yehoshua's own brother. It's really sad.
Yeah, he doesn't know the Messiah. He was just, his brother his whole life. What does he know?
He was just left the head of the assembly by Yeshua himself. That's all.
Right.
So do we want to talk about Paul?
Sure.
Okay, so today I was preparing for this, and I was just, when I start looking into the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's hard not to make that association with Paul, because Paul is spoken about in the Dead Sea Scrolls. He's referred to as the spouter of lies. And trying to...
Romans 14:2.
Romans 14:2. Do you have it in front of you?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
All right. One person's faith allows him to eat anything, but another, whose faith is weak, eats only vegetables.
Right.
In English Standard Translation, one person believes he may eat anything, while the weak person eats only vegetables.
Well, but then what does he say in at one point, I think it may be in Corinthians, but somewhere he's talking about the apostles, and he calls them uber apostolos, super apostles. Like he's sarcastically comparing himself to them, and he's saying, am I not as good as they are? And it's obvious that at some point he got into a situation where he was being called on the carpet, and that his deception was being exposed.
Yeah. Well, yeah, doesn't it say that he actually threw James down a flight of stairs, or
Right.
down the stairs of the temple?
Yeah, in the Nazarene Acts, at the same time that Stephen was stoned, James was attacked directly by Paul. So, I guess if we were going to examine it a little bit, the story really, the juicy part of the story really starts up in Galatians. And we mentioned it earlier about Kepha with regards to eating with the Gentiles. So, Saul, he starts off in Galatians and says, Saul, an emissary, not from men, nor by a man, but by Yeshua, Messiah, Elohim of the Father, who raised him from the dead. And, a lot of people just kind of gloss over that and say, well, look, see, this is saying that Paul was directly taught by Yeshua. But the reason he's saying that is because he's writing this letter, and he's in a rage against the apostles. And he is wanting to make clear that he is above them. He starts off bragging about how he progressed in Judaism beyond many of his those that were around him. And after he had this supposed revelation on the road to Damascus, then he goes to Jerusalem. He says, after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to learn from Kepha and remained there with him 15 days. And I saw none other of the emissaries except for James, the brother of the master. And what I write to you, see before Elohim, I do not lie. So why is he, he's defending himself against lying constantly throughout his epistles. And later on, he says that when he returns, I'm sorry, I should have highlighted this before, but he makes a point to say that he did not receive anything from the apostles. Not even Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. But as for the false brother sneakingly brought in, who sneaked in to spy on our freedom, which we have in Messiah Yeshua, in order to enslave us, to these we did not yield in subjection even for an hour. So again, he's relating that back to the Jerusalem assembly, to this party of the circumcision, that he himself is making a point to say he didn't submit himself to them. He says, so when Jacob or James, Kepha, and John, who seemed to be pillars, came to know the favor that had been given to me, they gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, only that we might remember the poor, or the Ebionites. And when Kepha had come to Antioch, I withstood him to his face because he was at fault. For before some came from Yaakov, he was eating with the Gentiles. So why would he say some from the Gentiles or some from Yaakov? The way he phrases it, whoever he's talking about is someone that he's not wanting to call them out by name. You know, it would be like if you were talking about your boss at work. You might say, well, somebody told me I couldn't do this, but it works better if I do it this way. Well, you know who the somebody is. It's somebody you don't want to call them out by name because it's somebody that's above you in the hierarchy. But when they came, he began to withdraw and separate himself for fear of those of the circumcision. And the rest of the Yehudim joined him in this hypocrisy. Even Barnabas was led away by their hypocrisy. So right there, he's admitting that everybody turned against him. You know, it's not like he didn't win the argument, in other words. You know, whatever the disagreement is, we're not told specifically what it is. But from that point forward in the book of the book of Galatians, he just goes into a rage against this group that he calls the circumcision. But if you read in Eusebius's church history, the party of the circumcision was the Jerusalem assembly themselves. In fact, he refers to James as the bishop of the circumcision. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to monopolize the whole discussion.
Oh, no, it's fine. It's interesting. But no, isn't there another part where Paul, in his anger against the apostles, he pretty much calls them like apostles of the mutilation, like saying that essentially he was saying that they cut off their penises.
Yeah, he does say something like, I wish they would just cut themselves off.
Right.
Or something to that effect.
Wow. Like when you take that in context, that's actually a pretty strong statement.
Yep.
It was one of the things when I was looking into him, and I'm like, wow, he's got a lot of bad fruit piling up here. Really.
It's too bad people can't see that. Like, it took me forever to see it. I was a huge defender of Paul for a long, long time. And
me too.
The father had, in fact, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, I was just saying, like, I'm very brand new to this too. Like, I know there's going to be a lot of people that hear us talking about this and are immediately like, whoa, you don't like Paul? But I was that way, like, even just back in January of this year. So
yeah.
you just gotta, just listen and just be patient and study, and you'll eventually get there.
It's funny because at one time I had flipped. I was actually against most of the apostles, and I was pro Paul. During my time of understanding Torah as what I thought Torah was, going through the whole Pharisaical thing, and then when I finally realized things aren't as they appear to be and aren't written, or things are added, I should say, to make certain people look good and certain people look bad, it became a really, really hard read to go through and go, what exactly are they saying and talking about here? That was a dilemma I had for a long time.
It's really, really frustrating that we know now that there's stuff that has been added and taken away. And I mean, we were told that in Revelation, it talks about don't, add or take away, or else you're going to get the plague. So obviously somebody's going to add and take away. And when I was searching up the Trinity issue, I kept seeing these verses that have been changed to promote the Trinity. And I'm like, why? Why did they keep editing the Bible? Why did they translate it this way? They did it for a purpose. And I'm like, well, how many other things did they do? And I actually was to the point that I was ready to get rid of the book of John, not the rest of the books of John, just the one Gospel of John. And that was before I even looked into Paul, because the Gospel of John actually starts out very, very Gnostic. Not that I say Gnostic, and now we're like, well, what does Gnostic even mean? There's so many different groups in Gnosticism that are even against each other. So, but anyway, there was one theory that beginning like 16 verses of the book of John might have been added, and they didn't have a title on the whole book. And then over time, it just got written as if it was all John writing it. And I'm still like on the fence. I'm still willing to study things, but I'm much more careful about believing something as canon, and that idea of canon came from the Roman Catholic Church anyway.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious because that's one of the things that John said all the time in his debate was Gnosticism. You know, when you start studying the Gnostics, like, holy cow, like, what exactly are you referring to? Because there's so many different opinions on what is and isn't Gnostic. Like, to me, that's just a word, kind of like American. You know,
Right.
what is and isn't American? What
Yes.
is? Go ahead.
I'm reading a little bit up on some of the Gnostic teachings, and actually a lot of them are very Christian, Christian. They could be almost like quote for quote from the scripture canon, things that Yeshua would say. So yeah, just like you said, it could be, it's as wide as saying American, because there's so many different beliefs, so many different people. It's not a good argument to just say, oh, that's Gnostic. And it's just like calling someone a heretic or a witch. And
Or conspiracy.
it's just like the new word now to denounce somebody without proof. It's just, oh, you're Gnostic, and they just shut you down immediately.
Yeah, it's like a boogeyman word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this episode with Kepha and Paul, the thing with Paul, if you understand that the group that he's attacking is the Jerusalem assembly itself, then the whole Bible just suddenly makes so much more sense, or at least it did for me. In fact, it's almost humorous the way the author of Acts covers this up. In the book of Acts, so chapter 15, it starts off where Paul and Barnabas and I think Silas, they're getting sent to Antioch to deliver the ruling of the Jerusalem assembly, which is, not to eat blood, not to eat things strangled, anything sacrificed to idols. And so we know what happens at Antioch. Antioch is where that episode with Kepha occurs. But in starting at Acts 15:37, it says, and Barnabas proposed to take with them John, called Mark. So Paul's getting ready to leave Antioch. Shaul says to Barnabas, let us go back to visit our brothers in every city where we proclaim the word of Yehoshua and see how they are. So now Paul's fleeing from Antioch. Of course, the author of Acts makes it sound like he's on a missionary type mission. But Barnabas proposes to take with them John, called Mark. But Saul thought it not fit to take with them the one who had withdrew from them in Pamphylia, and had not gone with them to do the work. And so a sharp feeling therefore came, so that they parted from one another, and Barnabas took Mark and sailed to Cyprus, and Saul chose Silas and went off, being committed by the brothers to the favor of Elohim. So Acts kind of glosses over it, like Kepha's not even mentioned in it. But this is where it admits that Barnabas and Paul kind of parted ways, and that there was a sharp argument between them. And so who was John Mark? Well, John Mark is mentioned back in Acts 12:12, where Kepha gets out of prison, and he goes and he's looking for James, because James is the head of the assembly, and he wants to let James know that he got out of prison. So it says, and having realized this, he went to the house of Miriam, the brother of John, who was also called Mark, where many had gathered to pray. And when Kepha knocked on the door of the gate, a girl named Rhoda came to answer, and she recognized Kepha's voice. She did not open the gate because of her joy, but ran and reported that Kepha stood at the gate. So anyway, they come back and they eventually let Kepha in, and he says, report this to Yaakov and to the brothers. Now, why would Kepha...
Can I pause you there just for 1 second? Because
Yeah.
I wanted to make a point before you keep going on. During that story, when the gal, when they go up to the upper room, isn't that the one where they all thought an angel had come to them first?
Mm-hmm.
I just want to point, isn't it interesting that their first thought isn't that Peter's out of jail, it's that an angel's at the door.
Right. That is interesting. But notice that he went to this house of Miriam looking for James, because Miriam was the mother of Mark or John. Now, Yeshua and James were brothers, and what was their mother's name? Miriam. So I'm thinking it was not just Miriam, the mother of John Mark, but I think it was Miriam, the mother of James, because James himself had a house in Jerusalem. So he went there looking for James. Now later on, back in Acts 15, this same man, John Mark, is there in Antioch when Barnabas and Silas, or Barnabas and Paul and Silas, part ways. So now I think we know who this son from James was. That the son was John Mark, who appears to be a member of the family of Yeshua itself, which would explain why Paul doesn't want to name who it was that came to him in Antioch that caused Kepha to withdraw from Paul. So it's a very, I think, a tangled web that begins to be weaved here. And so from this point, then, you have Paul ends up in Jerusalem around 58 AD, and he goes to meet with the brethren, and it says that he went in to meet James and all the elders, and they said to him, "You see, brother, how many thousands of the Jews here who have believed and are ardent for the Torah, and they have been informed about you, that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses and say not to circumcise children or to walk according to the practices." And of course, that's exactly what Paul was doing. But he evidently denied it because he says, well, let's do this to prove that you're not, teaching against Moses. And he sends Paul into the temple to pay for these people to end a vow. So the interesting thing, I think James is setting Paul up, because these myriads that are zealous for the Torah. He's talking about the zealots, and the zealots, if they heard an uncircumcised person speaking about the Torah, they would catch him in an alley and they would give him a choice of either being circumcised right then and there, or they would kill him. And so they're sending Paul into the middle of this. It's like sending somebody into a den of lions. And Paul goes into the temple and it causes a riot. And the only thing that keeps Paul from getting killed right then and there is that the Roman soldiers have to intervene. Have y'all ever thought about that? About whether it was James actually kind of setting him up?
No.
Well, the people that recognize him are from Asia, which is where Paul, that would have been Ephesus. It says that they recognized Paul with a man from Ephesus, which to me would seem to indicate that it was the assembly from Ephesus that saw him.
Oh, and that ties back to somewhere in Revelation. It's Yeshua talking to the church of Ephesus, right? And he's like, I commend you for finding false teachers or something and turning them away, not listening to them.
Right, exactly.
Have you guys ever considered the whole idea of circumcision? The Father says we shouldn't cut ourselves or to tattoo ourselves like the heathens do. The Father his perfect work was created in the garden. Why then would he ask us to circumcise ourselves? Why would he ask us to cut ourselves? Makes little sense to me.
I've thought about it, and honestly, there's so many references to it in the writings of the early apostles, and I think it's even mentioned in the Nazarene Acts, that I don't see how it could be something that's added, because I think they would have. There would be evidence of it somewhere. Paul, of course, is against it.
The Father asked them to actually cut themselves?
Yeah, I think it. I don't see evidence that it's not legitimate.
Because I think in Acts, that was one of the commands from the Jerusalem Council, right? Like, don't eat meat sacrificed to idols, and I think circumcision was one of the very important ones for the Gentiles to follow.
No, they said, actually, that was one they left out.
Was it?
Yeah. Just don't sacrifice animals, don't drink blood. But the circumcision was not part of that list.
Yeah, but the context of what they're saying is, he says, because from ancient times Moses is read in every city. Moses read in every city, therefore those proclaiming him being read in the congregations every Sabbath. I always took it to mean that this is kind of your starter command: stay away from these four things, and then you're going to be studying for the next year. And if we presume that they were Essenes, then that next year, I mean, it's written about in Josephus that they would spend a year learning the ways of the Essenes, and then they would move into the first order for a year, and the whole induction process took 3 years.
Well, because the circumcision, actually, as far as I know, is only part of the Torah, but it has nothing to do with the Ten Commandments. It was not on the commands Moses was given.
Yeah, it's because it was it wasn't part of the Torah, it was the Abrahamic covenant.
I'm just curious. What is everyone's understanding of what Torah is? The 5 books of the Bible are referred to by the Jews? Is that what?
No, it's following the Father's ways, his spiritual law.
It's got different definitions depending on who you talk to.
Right.
Right. I generally think of it just as his instructions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's my whole point. His instructions, from my take now, was never to circumcise oneself. I cannot agree the Father would ask us to cut ourselves. And I understand the whole ear on the doorpost, but like I said, there's a lot of, to me, from my perspective, there's just a lot of stuff there that I think was added that was never meant to be. The whole railing in Jerusalem by the whole apostles was circumcision versus non-circumcision. You can break it down to that too. I don't know. There just seems to be a lot of stuff that, I mean, if we're not to eat flesh, we're not to touch dead bodies, but we're supposed to cut ourselves. I don't know. I just was curious what people thought.
Yeah, I don't know on that one. I mean, I've heard different people on both sides, and I'm just glad I don't have to think about that. Yeah, I have no clue. It's just something to pray over, and try to find out from the Father personally. So, it's all we can do is just keep studying and asking, and we'll be led to what we need to know at the right time. Brad, I had somebody who wanted to ask you a question, and this is pretty much off topic at this point. But Elias wanted to ask you why you believe that Yehoshua pre-existed, and what you think about reincarnation, if you believe in it or not, based on your studies, I think. Good question.
I haven't really looked into it much. I mean, I'm not completely opposed to it. I know Christina's probably the one to ask about it. She's done some research into it.
Just a little bit. I've only been looking into it for maybe like 2 weeks or something, so I'm far from a professional. But I did read that reincarnation was actually a widely held Christian belief up until the 500 AD time frame, when I'm blanking on it, but of course it was a Roman emperor and his wife. I think her name was Theodora, but they outlawed it because they wanted to be seen as gods, essentially. And reincarnation, it was for the purification of the spirit through many lifetimes. And you know how in the scriptures, Yeshua often talked about, what you reap, you will sow. you know, if you live by the sword, you'll die by the sword. And that doesn't make sense if there's only one life, you know, because we know most people who live very violent, brutal lives, you know, if they have a lot of power and stuff, they're probably not going to die in the same way that they killed a bunch of people. So,
there is a reference where Yeshua is talking to James. I think it's James, where he says, "It is for your sake that I have come." And don't quote me on this. I've got to go back and reference it. But basically, James is Yeshua's basically called James the first Adam. Where does that come from?
Right, and there's a prophecy that, you know, Elijah would come before Yeshua, and you know, with the Christian faith today, they just say, "Oh, the spirit of Elijah." They mean just like teaching the same thing, but no, like the prophecy said, Elijah would come. So some people say that was the actual spirit that was inside of the man Elijah came back. That same spirit was in the body of John the Baptist, but I think the biggest proof for me that I've found so far, just in what we have, like in the Bible that was given to us by Rome, that took this belief away, was the story of the blind man that Jesus healed. And the disciples ask him, when they see this blind man, they ask, "Teacher, what caused this man to be born blind? Was it the sins of his parents, or was it his sins?" And if you think about this logically, how could this man have sinned if he was born blind? How did he sin before he was born? So just things to think about. I'm reading a book right now on reincarnation in Christianity, but I'm working on some studies, and I'll probably put those out later.
What was the other question? Why do I think Yeshua is pre-existent?
Yeah.
Well, in the Gospels, he says that before Adam was, I am. He does seem to make several references to himself being pre-existent. And, of course, the opening of the book of John, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with Elohim." And to me, that says he was pre-existent. I think he's actually what we see in the Tanakh as the angel of Yehoshua, or Yehoshua of hosts. You know, there's always this interaction that's shown between Yeshua and, between the father Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh and Israel, but yet Yeshua says that you've never seen the Father. So that tells me that that wasn't the Father, that was probably the Son. I've got a study on my YouTube channel that I put together. I think the name of it's "Who is Yehoshua of Hosts?" that goes into what my position is on it.
Thank you.
You know, there are a couple other ideas too, and that's that the Father said, "I emptied a part," or Scripture says, He emptied a part of Himself and became man. That's where the whole Christian Trinity idea comes from. But Yeshua said, "I'm not your master." He says, basically making us equal with Him, or we are co-heirs with Him. So whatever He did, however you want to explain it, even He said He and the Father are one. And then there's places where He says, "I'm not the Father." The Father is spirit. Yeshua said, "No man has seen the Father." Well, that's true. No man has seen the Heavenly Father Spirit. But that doesn't mean we haven't seen Yeshua, which is the Spirit made flesh. That's kind of how I look at it.
And I reject the Trinity idea, and I'm just sort of open, I guess, at this point when I started looking into the reincarnation thing. I mean, the Bible says that we are souls, we don't have souls, and that the soul will die, the soul that sinneth it shall die. But it also says the spirit will go back to our Father who gave it. So our Father's Spirit is coming to us and then going back to Him. And is that the Holy Spirit? I don't know. Things I'm just studying, you know. So this reincarnation thing is just sort of came up out of nowhere with both Kris and I at the same time. He was kind of hitting me over the head with it, with synchronicities, and got me to study it. I really don't know.
I agree with some reincarnation. I disagree with Trinity, but I agree with that some people are brought back for
So I don't
reason.
know if it's our Father's Spirit that's coming to us. Is that us? Is that what people call the soul? Is actually the Spirit, and they're just getting the terms mixed up? You know, I don't know. But also, our Father called us to be holy and blameless before Him, before the foundation of the world, and you know that's written. I don't remember where, but in our Bible. And so everything that Yehoshua was, I think that we are. I don't believe he was the creator because he said, his Father is the only true God and everything. And if he was around beforehand, that doesn't mean that we weren't either. I just don't know, I don't really know how to flush out this idea now that I'm considering reincarnation and spirits at all. So, I'm not clear on this yet.
I think in the Nazarene Acts they talk about it during the, Kepha's talking about it right before he tells the story about them going to the temple. He speaks about how, I believe he says that Yeshua was anointed with oil from the tree of life back in the Garden of Eden or something. And that to me sounds like that he existed prior to his birth in 3 BC.
Right. And I'm not sure if I believe this or not, but there is a Jewish belief in the Adam Kadmon. Have you heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
What is it? Is it just like a spiritual principle of masculinity or something?
It's similar to the primal Adam doctrine that the Ebionites talked about.
Okay, because there was something I read that some believed that Yeshua was actually Adam, and that's why he was called the second Adam. I'm not sure about that doctrine, but I thought it was interesting that some people believed that Adam became Yeshua.
Yeah, I don't know, because he very clearly basically says James is the first Adam. So I what's twisted, what's not, who knows? It's an interesting concept, though. Well, we're also in Genesis. Everyone makes this big deal out of it they're claiming there's 2 accounts of Genesis, and there isn't. If you understand that the Adam was both male and female, and that he separated them and clothed them with bone and sinew, that's one account, and you have two situations that happen there. And I've just been into a whole reading of like the first chapter of Genesis, where when you read it and you look it up in the interlinear and you read it, there are inconsistencies in the English translation to the Hebrew. For example, it says, and he saw that it was good. It was is not part of that translation. When you read it in context, it actually says, and we saw that God was good, or the Creator was good. It actually reads completely different than the way they have it in English. I'm going to probably do a whole teaching on that one too, because you have to look at it in its context. And anytime you see in the interlinear where there's brackets, they added that. It's an added, their assumptive adding to what Scripture actually says. I don't know if that makes sense, but
It's interesting. I've never studied those verses out before. But they do add a lot to our Bibles, and it's really disgusting. That's the one thing that really frustrates me, is that there is so much added, taken away, twisted with different translations. over time. It just, people get upset that you're like saying we're going to have to throw out Paul and throw out, the sacrifices in the Old Testament, and you're going to have to throw out this. And I'm like, if our Bible wasn't mishandled and mistranslated and added to and taken away from, we wouldn't have this issue. But we've got trust issues, and it's also why there's so many atheists and things like that, because they see our Father as like this really mean God that can't even be true, because he would burn creation in hellfire for all eternity and everything, and that's just ridiculous,
Yeah, and I'm going to have to go here in a few minutes, but I wanted to make one quick point regarding changing of Scripture. And everybody from that other channel was like, oh, Enoch, Enoch. At the end of Enoch, the Father says very clearly, I wish they had not changed my judgments and my righteous rulings. And I wish they had just translated it into their own language. That's a very clear, the Father putting his finger on it, going, look, you guys have changed what I said. And now it's all crazy. The Father said judgment and righteous will come, but he says, I wish you had not changed what I wrote. The Father himself testifies to the fact that what we call Scripture has been twisted at many, many levels. Or the Father wouldn't have thought it important enough to have written an Enoch, a book for the time of the end.
Yeah, and if you really think about what it is that we're not wanting, the part that we're told is disputed is two things. It's the animal sacrifices, and it's anything that paints the Father in a negative light. So if you really think about it, what of those two types of scriptures are they so in love with? I mean, do they really want to hold on and build doctrine around scriptures that say that the Father is, bloodthirsty or a murderer or vengeful or whatever else there is that there is in the scripture that paints him in a negative light? Or, I mean, do they really want to hold on to the verses about making sacrifices?
Well, how can you say the Father his mercies endure forever, and yet he's a bloodthirsty God?
Slays the innocent for the sake of the guilty. Yeah.
So anyway, Barb, I hate to run on you. This has been a great show, but I do have to go. But I just want you all to thank you for having me. Love you guys.
For coming on.
Keep it up and keep seeking out all truth, because I think those of us that seek it out will find it, and he will keep revealing to us, and the path will get narrower and narrower and narrower.
But he is bringing some of us together, which is really nice.
Yeah. So,
it's been a blessing. Thanks for being on.
Shalom to all of you. Love you. Talk to you soon. Nice to meet you, Brad.
Nice to meet you, Josh. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to have to go here in a few minutes, too.
Well, thank you for coming on. It was a great show.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And it's nice to get to talk to you, too.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you finally.
Okay. You guys have a good rest of the Shabbat, and I will catch you later on Facebook.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Shalom.
Shalom.
All right, Barb, was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
Oh, I don't know. Not really prepared on anything with the other stuff we've been discussing on Facebook yet. So I think maybe we'll just end it now, and maybe we'll have another one some other time.
Yeah, definitely.
So thank you for coming on, and I hope everybody else out there enjoyed this live show. Thank you to all in chat. All right, shalom.
All right, shalom, everyone.